A very good morning and a warm welcome to all of our students and particularly our guests who have braved the rain and got here this morning. This, as was mentioned here, is our second colloquium of the year. The first one, just a week or so back, was on caste, tribe and identity under the overarching theme of identities. I think that was very, very useful colloquium, as I'm sure this one will be as well. The one on science, trends in science, challenges in communication, in association with the Center for the Study of Science, Technology and Policy. Science, of course, is perhaps like journalism in a sense, is what we acutely need more of today, but we acutely lack, at least in a common, in the societal sense. Of course, science continues inexorably forward. Our scientists are doing wonderful work. I don't have to talk about our recent achievement, Chandrayaan, and other work that's going on. But in the consciousness of society, how important is science? Or is it being displaced, challenged, overtaken by mindsets of certitude that religion bring, or mindsets of certitude that dogmatic ideologies bring? And therefore, my sense is that science is acutely necessary here today. I don't think we've needed science as much for the last few decades as we think we need it today, or as since we need it today. Because science is, unlike the certitude of religion or ideology in some sense, open-ended. It is work in progress on a continuous basis. The falsifiability of science, as you know, is what makes it unique. And recently, for instance, I was fascinated to see even, the ideas of genetic determinism, if you like, you must have all read Dawkins and Selfish Gene and so on, being challenged in a sense by Dr. Dennis Noble, and there's this beautiful, wonderful conversation or debate, if you like, between the two of them. You'll find it on YouTube, where Dennis Noble, harking back to Lamarckism in a sense, is talking about how genes can be overwritten by the rest of the organisms, for instance. The acquired habits or acquired characteristics could actually be passed forward to progeny, and that could influence or, shall we say, inform in definitive senses the inexorable path of genetic determination, as we say, which Dawkins is supposed to represent. We know that since the collapse of the Cold War, we have been, in a sense, we know that it's commonly understood that we moved into a unipolar world. But what's really happened is that an era of ideology seems to have been replaced by an era of identity. So we have a multipolar identity conflicts as we speak. We can see it in the Middle East. We can see it in our own country in terms of identities vying with one another, sometimes in a volatile manner. And these are accentuated by mindsets of religion, of tradition, of obscurantism, and therefore I don't have to talk about this. We will find glorification of surgery in the Vedic period. We'll find how Hanuman got to be what he is attributed to surgery, and things like that. Therefore, I wonder whether science and the common man's understanding of it is being displaced by these obscurantist and retrogressive ideas. On the other hand, we also have the artificial intelligence and machine learning galloping ahead, sometimes I think ahead of us, ahead of our understanding. What we thought science fictional is almost becoming science, and some of it has actually covered the ground of science. We wonder whether the virtual will take over the corporeal and the physical, whether the virtual will have an autonomous existence, And if so, isn't that the more durable concept? There are philosophical questions of that kind which are cropping up in the realm of science and technology, or because of the tremendous potential and demonstrated capabilities of science and technology. There are startups funded with billions of dollars which are now looking at rejuvenating, which are looking at arresting aging and reversing aging perhaps. And therefore you have declarations of the kind that death will be optional by 2045. If you choose, you can die. Otherwise, you can continue to live on and on and on. Aging is increasingly being seen as a disease, not as a natural phenomenon. You know, that it's a disease that should be arrested and reversed. There's an ontological, approach, a discourse on the whole way of looking at life and living itself. So these are all therefore very exciting times, and I'm sure some of these aspects will be touched here, will be discussed here. At the same time, we also have, as I said, obscurantist ideas. I read recently that a student in Turkey for a PhD dissemination argued that the Earth is flat, and apparently wrote up hundreds of pages saying that. So to think that this can happen here and now is also surprising. We've seen how religious certitudes can lead to problems of the kind we've seen recently in Cochin, where the Jehovah's Witnesses congregation, there was a bomb blast by one of the faithful himself, who became a doubting Thomas, so to speak. And so I think the relevance of this colloquium cannot be, overstated at all. It is very, very relevant. It's a need of our times, and I hope one of our hopes is that more and more students of journalism and more and more journalists certainly will not only acquire a scientific temper in the way they practice their profession, but explore science as a specialized area of journalistic inquiry, of interrogation, of research, of investigation, and so on and so forth. I look forward, like all of you, to listening to the various presentations here. Let me first of all welcome my good old friend, at whose initiative, in fact, this partnership with C-STEP began. It's our second year that we are doing this. Dipankar Banerjee, who is the chairman of C-STEP, that is a Center for the Study of Science, Technology and Policy, and also the executive director of C-STEP, Dr. Jay Asundi, both of whom are here. Let me also welcome our distinguished speakers for the various sessions. The keynote address will be delivered in a short time after the address by Dr. Dipankar Banerjee, by Sitabhra Sinha, professor of the Institute of Mathematical Sciences, Chennai. We will then have Professor Shankar from the Institute of Mathematical Sciences, Chennai, speaking on climate science and insights on climate change. Anjali Taneja, a senior policy specialist from C-STEP, addressing the issue of sustainable solutions for urban spaces. Later on in the afternoon session, we have Professor Indumati, who will deliver the second keynote of this colloquium on critical science, journalism, communicating with children. And then we will have Nandita Jayaraj, who is in fact an alumna of our college, who will be speaking on communications, covering women's work in science, challenges and insights. We'll have, almost as a kind of spillover from our last colloquium, looking at the issue of caste, gender and science by Sayantan Datta from Kriya University, and regional media perspectives of science by Narmada Devi, who was formerly with Dinamalar, science editor. So this is the lineup, and it's a fascinating lineup. So I'd request all of you to be here in time. We are already late. I hope we'll make up. Otherwise, we'll just overshoot, have less time for lunch, but try and keep to the time. And therefore, here's wishing you a wonderful, meaningful, and fulfilling colloquium. And I'd like to thank all our guests here today and invite Professor Banerjee to make his opening presentation. Thank you very much.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sashi. Thank you, Nalini, and everyone that's worked to put together this colloquium. I guess what I want to do over the next 20 minutes or so is sort of expand on the themes that Sashi has already talked about. And so why are we doing this colloquium? I think our political leadership in different countries have already understood the importance of science and technology in our daily lives. And part of the reason why we are doing this colloquium is also this little statement by Dr. Ramakrishnan made at ACJ when he gave a talk over here. So how do we marry the thoughts of a political leadership, the science and technology people who do science and technology, and society at large, is broadly the theme that one would like to touch upon in this colloquium. So what I want to do is very briefly cover how science and scientists think about science and technology, talk a little bit about how science and technology affects society, and I hope in doing that I'll also enthuse you, the future of media, to understand why you should be looking at this interaction between science, technology, and society. So the word scientist is pretty recent, somewhere in the 19th century. But of course, science and technology has evolved over the years with civilization. And you just have to think of the wheel as an example, before 2500 EC as an example of technology, or the mathematics of zero as an example of science, and the way we have evolved in our civilization. And its most exalted, and I think Sashi touched upon this, is that there is an intimate connection between magic, science, and religion, and all of them in their own ways try to understand our conception of ourselves and our place in the universe and how we shape our lives. How do scientists do science? The classic understanding of most of us is that we observe nature, we look at patterns in nature, and then we propose a law of sorts that describes these patterns. And typically, you might believe that this is gone. You might believe in the sort of thing that you see at the top there. Politician one is corrupt, two is corrupt, and lead to the general conclusion that all politicians are corrupt. And obviously, that's not really the right sort of conclusion. Incidentally, that is the way artificial intelligence works at this time. But an alternative, rigorous view of the way science is done is that a number of competing conjectures are systematically subjected, and Sashi just talked about this. And theories that survive the process are more truths. So the process leads automatically the conclusion that there are no absolute truths in science. So truth is a function of the time, and the time at which we are observing nature with our senses and with the instruments that we develop to observe nature. And that truth can change. And essentially, there's an analogy with the idea of justice as well. Is there a comparative or transcendental frame for justice? So I'm going to... This is stuck. Okay. So I'm going to give you a few examples of these changing paradigms of scientific truth, just to emphasize this point. So of course, Sashi talked about the flat Earth, and somewhere in 200 AD, we had the view that the Earth is round, but at the center of the universe, and then now we understand that we are really part of an infinite system and really a small speck in an infinite system. And what about the nature of the universe itself? I'm sorry, this is not, are you going to change it? No. This is not, it's going very slowly for some reason. Okay, I'm not quite sure what's going on with this, but, and so what about the nature of the universe itself? And again, you had Sir Isaac Newton, who examined the forces between bodies. And in his universe, time and space are distinct entities in an unchanging state. But of course, you know that Newton's laws determine everything that happens around us, the chair you're sitting on, the jet engines that fly. But even that law is not immutable. So when you have bodies that move in relation to each other at speeds approaching the speed of light, you then have a new universe emerging, or a new understanding of the universe emerging, in which space-time is completely interrelated and can warp depending upon mass and energy in the space. And so in this framework, the universe is no longer static, but it must have had a beginning 13.7 billion years ago and is expanding. And then, of course, Einstein's relativity met quantum mechanics. And in quantum mechanics, as you know, you cannot identify the position and the velocity of the smallest particles, an electron, for example, with any degree of certainty. And the implication of that is we don't quite know what happens at the earliest stages of the formation of the universe, at the beginning of the universe. So we still don't understand quite how the universe works, and a holy grail for modern physics is a theory of quantum gravity. But again, to point out that our ideas of the universe and its nature are constantly changing with time. And if that is so for inanimate objects, it is also true for life itself, starting from concepts of man as the center of the universe, or man as the central thing in all of life. We now understand that we are only a part of an infinite array of forms that have evolved since the first cell 4,500 million years ago, and then the first human about 60,000 years ago. So we now have a concept of a world in which we, as human beings, are only a small speck in an infinite array of inanimate and life forms. And if you think of yourselves in that context, some of the petty concerns that we have from our day-to-day experiences simply fall away. And so that view, that evolutionary view of the universe, is also supported by a genetic view of the universe. So here are these beautiful images of how embryos evolve, protein differentiation in embryos, proteins then expressed in functional forms to embryonic structures. And again, to remind you that the similarities between us and mice and monkeys range from about 70 to 90%. And that's an extraordinary amount of similarity. But most of us, all of the time, you might wonder how we as a community of scientists work, given this nature of science that I tried to describe to you. So we have a self-regulating community of researchers, and they're governed by a common ethos, a sharing of information, a skepticism of results, and that's a nice ideal way of which science is thought to be done. But in reality, the world is different. Scientists are human beings like everyone else, so the criteria are not strictly objective. There's a dynamic between the way ideas challenge the environment, the way environment shapes ideas. Self-interest matters, social values matter, sources of funding matter. And yet, science progresses, and those two cartoons express these two extreme views, if you will, of how science operates. But of course, the way we operate is somewhere in between. And so science and technology in action, given this diversity of influences, can take very strange forms. And the curiosity of science can express itself in ways that are really not very tenable in our society. And one must be aware of this. But of course, most of us all of the time can't be bothered about our relationship with the universe, the animate or its life forms. But we are impacted in our daily lives by science translated to technology or engineering. So what is technology? Well, I think most technology began as craft. And I've got this example of metallurgy as craft and these beautiful Chola bronzes that you sitting in Chennai may be quite familiar with. And the way these bronzes were made by what is called the lost wax process, and the description of that is given over here. So what is interesting is that identical process is the way that the blades that go into jet engines are made, but of course, with significantly more scientific understanding of the materials process. So starting as craft becoming technology. And I do want to then emphasize that all technology is evolutionary in nature. Nothing springs up overnight, but there is a time and pace of change. That pace of change can be fast or slow, depending upon where we are in time. But so here is an example of the evolution of genetics and the identification of DNA as early as in 1871. And a key key point in this evolution, the structure of DNA, identified in 1953, notions of heredity developed by Gregor Mendel in 1865, and all of this today will impact, I think, disease treatment, technology, and healthcare costs, accompanied again by issues of ethics, of gene evolution. And you can look at a similar evolution then in artificial intelligence, something that's occupying our time and mind and space today in increasing ways. And so again, you can look at the way artificial intelligence has evolved from, let's say, the abacus in about 200 BC, means of communication, means of computation, and mathematical ideas of how the mind works have all been integrated together in what we today call artificial intelligence. So all technology is evolutionary. But there is also a very intimate connection between science, technology, and war. And I suppose most of you have now seen the movie Oppenheimer, and you would have understood the enormous tugs of war between a weapons system development, political forces, human interactions, and all of that, and how it expresses itself in what finally happens. But to remind you all again that all of this is based on the Einstein formula, which relates energy to the mass of an object and the velocity at which the object moves. And that scientific principle is used just about everywhere in the technology that we are familiar with for good uses. But the point that I wanted to make with this slide is that the perception of ethics, morality, and neutrality of science and technology can be very anomalous at its best. And that's something that all of us should also be aware of. And so what is the relationship between science, technology, and society? So we have on the one side science, technology, and engineering, and a group of people who practice this. And then we have society that uses the outcome of science, technology, and engineering through the production, through its action on the production of goods and services. But as we all know, and should know, that the production of goods and services depend on the demand of goods, the factors of production. Anjali is going to talk about some of this, I suppose, later on. And capital, labor, land, infrastructure policy, and more recently, sustainability and environment effects. So you might think of science and technology and engineering as a distinct silo from society in general, but the connection between what happens in society, the outcome of what we do in science, technology, and engineering, and society is expressed in these factors, and therefore the political, geographical, social, and environmental ecosystem in which science and technology operates. And so I want to talk about this with a very simple example of the Industrial Revolution. I could have chosen more complex topics, but this is one way to look at this interaction between science, technology, economics, and society. And just to remind you that in 1733, the shuttle for weaving was mechanized. And before that, 6 spinners were needed to keep one weaver supplied with cloth. And when the shuttle was invented and developed, the productivity of the weavers increased enormously, and therefore there was a shortage of spinners. So the weavers were unhappy, but the spinners were happy. And then what happened was that a machine came along for spinning, and all of a sudden, the shortage of spinners vanished. Okay? So now the spinners and weavers were both unhappy, but you increased production rates enormously. And so you had now an economy based on large-scale industry, mechanized manufacturing, and the factory system expressed through this example of textile engineering. And the average income as a consequence of the Industrial Revolution began to exhibit unprecedented sustained growth. Okay? So here is a connection between science, technology, and what ultimately happens in society through an example of the Industrial Revolution. And so we have this enormous impact of science and technology on our lives in terms of a historical evolution, if you will, of materials and the way it has affected science and technology. We can talk about the Green Revolution. Dr. Swaminathan passed away recently. Alternative energy, the jet engine influencing transportation, and you can go on with this list. And so, as a consequence of this, there is a relationship between research and development expenditure and the GDP. And you can see how there is an exponential growth of GDP with increasing research and development expenditure. So it's interesting to see how different countries spend their research and development, and you can see where India is in relation to, let's say, China or Mexico or the United States or Japan. The size of the circle here is the size of the investment in research and development, and there are some numbers for you over there. So this is something that you must also be concerned with when you think about the impact of science and technology on our society. But of course, as the GDP has grown, and as the impact of science and technology on every aspect of our life is increased, and as our population is increased, we have additional factors that are now beginning to affect us. So there is climate change. There is now an understanding of different aspects of sustainability that we must be concerned with. There are issues of technology supply restrictions, supply risks, their impact on the environment. And so today, as a society, we have to carefully engineer a balancing act. And that balancing act involves the technology itself, economic growth, national security interests, climate change, sociological aspects, extremely important in terms of how behavior is determined by appropriately apportioning costs and benefits, how technology and the changes in related climate changes and other risks affect employment, migration, culture, and lifestyle. And in a sense, this is what we are examining at the Center for Science, Technology, and Energy Policy. And so on behalf of Jay, I'm happy to invite interns, if you will, from ACJ, if you wish to participate in this process during a summer holidays or whatever, to be with us and see how we look at these relationships at the Center of Science, Technology, and Energy Policy. But to conclude then, and this is really the most important slide that I wanted to share with you, all of you who are students of the media, and that is that science and technology are really woven into the fabric of our society. And there are very large-scale impacts of technology on society. And technology in a broader sense, not in the sense of tech related to information technology. And given that impact, it's extremely important to make the right choices about what technology will be used and how. And we have to make these decisions about the scale and direction, the way we use scarce resources in relation to these technologies, and the trajectory of those choices that will determine our well-being and health in energy and water resources, clean air, and in every aspect of our lives. And so I would say that the choices that we make, given this impact and integration of science and technology on our lives in general, these are choices that are too important to be left to scientists, technologists, and engineers. Social aspects, economic aspects, all of this must be integrated in these choices. And the choices must emerge with a public understanding of science and technology. And so I would appeal to you as a future of media to look at this expression of the relationship between science, technology, society, and the economy very carefully, because it will affect the future that we all live in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your very insightful lecture. You've truly fleshed out the complex interrelationships between science and various aspects of the society. Now, I welcome to the stage Dr. Sitabra Sinha, who will deliver the keynote address. Sure, sir.
So it's a great pleasure to introduce Professor Sitabra Sinha. He is a professor in the Institute of Mathematical Sciences in Chennai over here. He did his PhD in the Indian Statistical Institute in Kolkata and has been in different organizations before he came over here, including where I am at the moment, the Indian Institute of Science. And it's completely appropriate today that he delivers this talk because he's going to talk about complex systems. And I tried to introduce to you today in my presentation the complexity of the world in general, but he really works on the understanding of complex systems, the mathematics of complex systems, and its application to biological systems, to various social and economic phenomena, and to computational linguistics as well. So I can't think of a more appropriate person for you to listen to into how scientists think of the complexity of the world we live in its various aspects. either things work beautifully or they don't work at all. And, okay, so I think we're going to be solving the problem fairly soon. Yeah, so while we're waiting, if does anyone want to, does anyone have any comments or questions about the presentation I made or what Sashi said? Students at the back, do you have any thoughts that you want to share or ask questions about while we wait for Professor Sinha to get going?
Graph is well known that the relationship between the R&D expenditure and the GDP. But then, of course, there is a expenditure scale is global, different. But we always also know from various Indian contexts, the expenditure in India for a certain thing. It seems recently also discussed in the case of Chandrayaan that the thing was achieved at a much, much lesser cost than the cost in other countries. So I wonder whether this needs a correction, this R&D expenditure in GDP, the trends, because what is the scale of expenditure in the United States for several things may be too high as compared to the same objectives achieved to be in this country.
Well, yes, that's an interesting thought, but I think there are two aspects that you must consider when we talk about absolute expenditure, let's say of the systems we have developed in India. It's not necessarily just ISRO systems, but also the Department of Atomic Energy's contributions, DRDO's contributions to weapon systems. And when you look at that expenditure, you must look upon it as at the point in time that we realize that expenditure to create the system. The amount of money and the effort that was put into the original development of these systems was far higher in the United States or elsewhere in the world. And when we come in at a certain point of time, we are already utilizing, if you will, the fruits of that expenditure in terms of the systems knowledge that we're utilizing in our own efforts. Okay? So we are riding on the giants, on the shoulders of people who have made that investment. And this is important to understand. You can talk about an expenditure now being low, but actually you're utilizing the expenditure of people who have created the knowledge of that system. Okay, this is something that's very important to understand. And so the curve of R&D expenditure versus GDP still remains. If you want to generate new knowledge, you must have that scale of investment. I would suggest to you as an alternative way of thinking about it. Yeah, so you must think about this as well, that the curve will not change very much. The second aspect of that expenditure is that in general, we've talked about the factors of technology realization being affected by land, labor, and human costs. These are much lower in India. Okay? So when someone says that they've done it at a fraction of the cost, I think that hides other aspects of expenditure that have already been made and other aspects of expenditure in our country. Okay? Yeah.
To, or see some amendments to that thing. I don't know.
Well,
I'm not capable of making that
Okay,
amendment.
I was suggesting to you that it probably doesn't need correction. Yeah.
Thank you for that lovely talk. I really enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you.
I have this question. You mentioned that science and technology is too important to be left to scientists, technologists, and we must get involved. But you also mentioned that scientists are, in a sense, in a ivory tower, and so they are the best people. They contain the knowledge. They have the knowledge to themselves, a large part of it. So what would be the nature of interaction between the scientists and the journalists?
Well, I try to express this, I think, in the way we make, ultimately, everything that you do is a political choice, okay? For example, if you're looking at the transition to green energy, you are making choices about what technologies are going to support that transition to green energy. Are you going to focus on hydrogen? Are you going to focus on solar energy, on wind energy? What fractions of these? What is the available land? What are the costs? And so on. These are very complex things. The science and technology people who develop this technology are completely immersed in the development of technology. They're not equipped to understand the impact on other factors, right? And yet, the choice must be made by an integration of all these factors to guide us on our path forward. How does the general public know about these choices, the nature of these choices? How does it affect whether you invest in hydrogen, whether you stop using thermal power, how does the public know about the implications of all of this? How do you translate those relationships in a manner that the public understands? And there lies the importance of the media. Okay? And the media can do it. The media can do it only if it has an intimate knowledge, well, at least a level of knowledge about science and the technology in general, economics, social factors, to create a broad understanding of these effects for the public at large. So that is how I see the importance of the media, I guess. I don't know if Jay has anything else to add to express this in a better way, but yeah. And so I would think that this must be a very important part of the media and its role in our society. It's too important to be left alone, and indeed formed the basis of this colloquium over a dinner I had with Sashi a long time back. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you also, I guess, in relation to this, need media that is trained in these aspects. Okay. So it looks as if we're still going to take some more time. So what, do you want to break or?
Could we go for the next session?
Sure. Yeah. Just check. But the students are very quiet, and wouldn't someone just... No?
I think they'll warm up a little later.
Okay. Right.
Just 2 minutes.
Okay, sure.
Dr. Sitabra Sinha has to leave, so he will just, if you can just wait for a few minutes, his presentation will get sorted out and we'll have the session now. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
flask, and the whole flask flies off the floor to the sky. Now, you would know that something funny is going on, right? This simply cannot be a true movie. So in fact, what I did was I used another movie, again this one play, which showed that it was basically a flask full of water which came from the top, hit the floor and shattered, and that essentially is what I was showing in reverse. Now, how do you know that the first movie I showed you is actually not a true movie? I was doing some technological gimmickry. That's because of the arrow of time. Okay? So the reason why people wanted to link these two was to ask, where does this arrow of time come from? Okay? And this answer was given by Ludwig Boltzmann in the 19th century. And sometimes people say that scientists are very dry people, they have no emotions, they're like emotional robots. But the life of Ludwig Boltzmann is complete opposition to that. He was so emotional about his science, he actually committed suicide just before his theory was about to be accepted. He just couldn't take it anymore. So, we all hear about, poets like Rimbaud and, other poets who, commit suicide in their garrets, and we read their lives and we think, oh, how tragic. Well, Boltzmann is just as emotional, as romantic, and as tragic, okay, even though he looks very unromantic, I must admit. But in his heart, he was just as emotional and romantic as a poet, that for him, his life was not worth living if, as he felt, people were not taking him seriously. And it's tragic because it was just a few years afterwards that, the theory that he proposed was completely accepted, and Boltzmann is now considered to be one of the leading figures of physics. So what Boltzmann essentially said was that, look, pretty easy to explain this the moment you realize that if everything is reversible, but the number of possible states that you have when you look at 10 to the power 23 particles is enormous. Okay? So when you start from the so many particles making up the state from this initial condition and go to the final state, they may eventually come to this initial state, but the probability of getting that initial state is minuscule. It will take more than the age of the universe to get back to that initial state. And so that's why you do not have reversibility at this macro scale. Well, I'm just making a very, very simple minded kind of explanation of that. But in a nutshell, he explained it beautifully. Okay? So essentially what so this is emergence. So arrow of time is something which emerges only once you go from the domain of single particles to the domain of zillions of particles. And in a similar manner, in all complex systems, essentially we have emergence when you take a large number of components and you link them each other with interactions. Okay? So essentially the way we define a complex system is that we have many interacting components which are connected in a network, which results in the emergence of behavior of the system, which is completely different from the behavior of the individual components. Now, this might look like a very complicated definition, so let me just make it simple. So think of each of these components as individuals, and they are linked by social interactions. So the system, the complex system, is a crowd, and the emergent behavior could be a riot. Okay? So as we all know, and as the first talk actually mentioned, that we are in our society seeing more and more violent, polarized conflicts, especially religious pogroms. Now, I've been in in a train once where we were passing through a particular state, and many college-going youths from that state got on that train, And something happened, one of my co-passengers did something or said something, and then this youths got very violent. They tried to beat up the people and so on. Then, after things settled down a bit, one of them sat beside me, and I started asking him, what does he do? So he said, he studies maths in the local college. And then we started talking, after half an hour, and he was knowing that I am at the Institute of Mathematical Sciences. He wanted to ask me about what book should I study, how do I get into a PhD program, and so on. So after half an hour of this, I asked him, why did you do this? Why did you take part in this very violent thing? Because he was one of the more violent people in that incident, and he was so ashamed. He said, I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't know what happened to me. It was just the heat of the moment because my friends were doing this, And I realized, this was also an emergence. Every person in that, crowd who were like, wanting to beat us up were probably all extremely intelligent youths. One to one, they're all interested and they're very respectful towards me. But you put them as a crowd and they sometimes, they just do things that they will never do when you look at them singly. So this is one of those emergent properties. Why do crowds sometimes behave completely opposite to what individually all of them believe in? Okay? And this is very important to understand, especially in the context of the religious strife that we are seeing around here. So many of these people who are indulging in arson or beating up or being cow vigilantes and so on, maybe they are individually perfectly rational beings, but you put them in the appropriate company and they will be part of a lynch mob. Okay? So we need to understand this emergence. So what we do in a usual scientific sense is we set up a toy system. So we can understand how these interactions lead to this novel behavior through interactions or self-organization. Okay? So we often hear this word, right? The crowd has no mind. So one of the models we could set up is to understand how does a crowd of individuals suddenly switch to being a violent mob for a very brief duration. Okay? Of course, there are always a few agent provocateurs in this mob, but sometimes these don't. You put an agent provocateur, nothing happens. Some person. So as one of my economist friends once said, one person picks up a stone and throws it at the police just pounce on this person and takes him away. 2 people do it, same thing. 3 people, same thing. 4 people, not so sure. 5, getting scary. 6, let's run away, folks. It's going to be a massive riot. Okay. So what is it that leads to this transition? 1 person throwing a stone is just an insane person. 10 people throwing a stone will start a riot. Okay? So what leads to this transition? So that's what we would like to understand. Okay? So one way to understand this is to set up a toy model where we say that, look, how do we model the state of individuals? All individuals are very, very complex beings. But we could do something very simply. We could say individuals mostly stay in a quiet or a resting state, but occasionally they may be driven by circumstances to an agitated state or an excited state for a relatively brief duration. So what we do, in the spirit of the famous spherical cow, so I don't know how many of you know this story. So, so there's this joke about when mathematicians or physicists are asked to model real systems. So in this particular case, some mathematician was given the job of figuring out how to increase the productivity of milk production, So the guy was given lots of details, big volumes of studies of cows and so on. And then a year later comes back his report, and the first line of the report says, let us first consider a spherical cow. Okay? So you can understand how the rest of the report went. So in that spirit, So we are basically saying that each individual is either in a resting or an excited state, and it goes from a resting to an excited state if a stimulation exceeds a particular threshold. Now, all of us have a threshold, right? So some are like, extremely irritable people, right? You ask them, what's the time of the day? The person probably snaps at you. We all know such people. And some others are like almost Buddha-like, right? You slap them, you hit them, you take away their money, no reaction, They are like, they've attained a complete nirvana-like state, okay? So they have a very, very high threshold for being excited, all right? So, but everybody has a threshold. So if you exceed the threshold, you go from the resting state to the excited state. And after the excitation, you cannot be excited again for a brief period during which the person is recovering, okay? So I can give you a practical demo. You just select someone and let's say poke him or her very hard, okay? The usual reaction would be, either, some glare or, maybe some statement like, stop being childish, okay? Or something even more violent. Then before this person recovers, if you poke him or her again, you'll just get a pained expression, not quite the same expression as the first time. But let's say you wait for a day or a week, and then surreptitiously when that person is looking the other way, you again poke him or her very hard, and you'll probably get the same expression, "Hey, when will you learn?" or something like that, right? So you have a recovery time. Right? All right, so what we will do is, we will just use this simple properties and something else. We will say that an element can pass its excitements to its neighbors. Okay? So the more excited neighbors you have, the more likely you are to cross the threshold. Okay? So let us take a very simple network of individuals like this, and when you see this kind of a explosion like tag, it means that that particular person is excited. So the question we are asking is whether an initial excitation will pass, and it turns out that it depends on its neighborhood. So first, we will try with exciting this person. Now this person will try to pass it on to others, but you see that this person is not really well connected to the rest of the individuals. So eventually, this excitation will just die away without much of an effect. On the other hand, if you excite this person, see, this person is very well connected in its network. So there's a very high chance that this excitation will pass on to this person. Now, notice what will happen. This neighbor has now two individuals who are excited and is very likely to get excited. And now, therefore, this person has two excited neighbors and will likely get excited, and then this goes on, and eventually the entire system can get excited. So whether an initial excitation will pass depends very much on the social structure, how the particular individual being excited is connected to the rest of the system. And this is something that you can see in action in stadium crowds which are doing the Mexican wave. So just in case some of you are not aware of what the Mexican wave is, I have a video of a Mexican wave in the London Olympics, so you can see what's going on. So a section of the crowd is standing up and throwing up its hands, and you can see this is being passed on to the next section, and then these guys throw up their hands, and then the whole excitation passes around. All right? So, and of course, you guys can do this in your classroom, okay? And this is a nice YouTube video I found of a Mexican wave in a classroom. Well, it's a bit more complicated than Mexican wave. It's quite funny, actually. In a particular boring class, you can try it. Okay, so, so that sounds like fun, but it turns out that this actually occurs in biological systems too. Okay, so if you look at I think the second speaker was talking about development, and he was showing some of the pictures I think obtained from Sashidhara. Yes, yes. No, this guy. Yeah, yeah. I actually met that guy whose lab actually made these photos. Just his name is slipping my mind. But so this is basically the same thing. It's a fruit fly embryo, and this is the anterior and the posterior. So unfortunately, the movie won't run because it's one of those movies which are linked. But if the movie ran, what you would see is that the cells are dividing. The cells have to divide, right? So because the cell, basically we go from a single cell to this size by essentially having a single cell dividing from 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16, and so on and so forth, right? So essentially every few seconds or minutes, the cells will divide. But how would they coordinate the division? Because it's no use the cells here dividing a lot and the cells here not dividing at all. So you'll basically get a huge lump like a tumor over here and then nothing here, right? So the cells have to coordinate the division. And they do this by doing the Mexican wave. So if this movie ran, what you will see is that the cells here first divide, then the next neighboring cells divide, then the neighboring cells divide, and basically you'll see something like a Mexican wave running through the entire system, and then again starting over here, running through the entire system, and so on and so forth. So that's how they coordinate their division, by having a wave-like spread of this cell division going from the posterior to the anterior end, right? So the other reason why we are so interested in these kinds of waves of excitation is because these kinds of systems are all around us, especially the brain, where the individual neurons are all excitable cells, and the heart, where the cardiac myocytes are also excitable. So if you look at a cardiac muscle, which way am I going? Yeah, so it consists of all these excitable cells laid next to each other like a brick wall. So if you look at the normal functioning of the heart, then the excitation basically propagates from one cell to the next cell to the next cell, and you will basically see a wave of electrical excitation spread from one end of the heart to the other. And every time a cell is electrically excited, it contracts, and that's what leads to the heart pumping blood. But occasionally, you will have situations like this, where part of the heart is going to be non-excitable, and this will allow the wave to curl up into this spiral wave. Now, what you notice is that it's a self-regenerating wave. You don't need the heart's normal pacemaker to start this wave. Once you set it up, it will just go on and on and on. So it will interfere with our natural clock of the heart, the sinus node. And because these are way faster, the heart will try to beat, let's say, 4 or 5 times faster than it normally should, and you get basically an episode of tachycardia. And sometimes worse things happen. So if you actually study the heart, and in this particular case it's a dog heart, and you look at what's going on when basically you get these episodes of arrhythmia, which are often life-threatening, you see that essentially there are spiral waves which are occurring on this heart muscle. So this is a big development which has occurred only from the 1990s, where we can actually image what's going on in the heart during arrhythmia. Earlier, you only had to resort to ECG recordings, where you saw that normal sinus rhythm would be sometimes replaced by tachycardia. As you can compare, the sinus rhythm is like 5 times slower than the tachycardia, and then sometimes worse things happen. This is the fibrillation. So fibrillation is where each part of the heart is doing its own thing. Okay, so it's like a Mexican wave, except everybody is blind. Everybody is jumping up and down in their own sweet rhythm. So even though people are jumping up and down occasionally, you don't see any coordinated motion, and so therefore the Mexican wave cannot be seen at all. Exactly the same thing occurs in fibrillation. The cardiac cells are all essentially trying to beat, but they are not coordinated. There is no coherence whatsoever, and the heart, because all the cells are not getting activated together, stops pumping blood, and of course a few minutes of this, you are dead. And this brings us to a very nice illustration of why we need complex systems. Okay? So this is a chart which tells you what were the results of the clinical trials of a few cardiac drugs. Okay? So this white line is basically the line which tells you that people taking the drug and people who were given placebos, they have essentially the same incidence of cardiac arrhythmia or cardiac arrest and so on. So if you're on this side of the white line, that means those who were given the drug actually have reduced number of episodes of cardiac arrhythmia. And if you're on this side, that means you actually have more episodes of cardiac arrhythmia than if you were not given the medicine. Now, what strikes you from this chart? As a journalist, if you saw this chart and I gave you this explanation, what would you say would be the, make for an interesting story? Sorry? It's not all drugs. So, for example, beta blockers are pretty good. So they have reduced it to 81% from normal. Yeah. So what is interesting is, I really wish one of the students said it though. Thank you, sir. What is really interesting is that this particular trial, people who were given the drug were dying at more than twice the rate of people who were not being given the medicine. Similarly, here, those in the SOAR trials, so here they were given a medicine called desotalol. People were dying at almost 1.5 times the rate of people who were not given the medicine. Now, that is interesting, right? These drugs were developed after animal trials. You don't just develop arbitrary molecule and then just start to give it to humans. Before you give it to humans, there are lots of animal trials you go through. You give it to this healthy individuals just to make sure it doesn't do anything bad. Then you give it to unhealthy individuals. So what happened? Why is it that drugs which are supposed to save people were killing them at more than twice the rate of people who were not given the drug? Surely the pharmaceutical industry is not stupid, right? So there's a story there. Okay? So if you dig deep into the story, it turns out that the reason that drugs which are developed to prevent cardiac arrest kill even more people had to do with the fact that the reductionist approach of developing drugs actually for once failed. So what's the reductionist approach? The reductionist approach is you take a molecule and you see what action it has on a single cardiac cell. Okay? And in this particular case, the thinking went like this. Why do arrhythmias happen? That's because the cells are, very excitable. They're all the time jumping up and down. And so they're interfering with the action of the normal clock of the heart, the pacemaker cells. So, solution? Well, if you don't want people to be jumping all up and down in this room, let's say people were very excitable and they were jumping up and down. Well, maybe, you're pretty senior students, but, in some schools I have gone, during my talk, some students were jumping up and down all the time, right? So what do? Well, in the case of the class, of course, the teacher goes and, let's say, while I'm not looking, beats them up. But in the case of the cell, you give them drugs to quieten them down. Okay? So they are more sluggish. Okay? They are less prone to being excitable. At the cell level, this seems like a reasonable idea. that because you don't want them to be too excitable, you give them a drug such that they become sluggish. However, if you look at it from the point of view of the entire heart, what do you need? You need a wave to go through, right? And so now you've given a drug, some cells are more weak than others. So, when the Mexican wave comes along, some cells are like this, and other cells are, yeah, let's go. Other cells are, yeah. So you can pretty much imagine what happens, right? So you'll have a complete chaos going through. And this pretty much what happened. The drug essentially made some cells so sluggish that they didn't take part in this coordinated wave. The wave broke down, formed spiral waves, formed essentially in the episodes of fibrillation, and that's how people died. Okay, and you can see that. Okay, another thing, these are mean values, and then these bars are the standard deviations. Okay, hopefully you know what is standard deviation, right? It's the how much deviation or how much variation there is over the mean. Now, what you notice is that these have very large variations. How would you interpret that? Anyone can guess why there are such big deviations? They're much bigger than, for example, these. Not related to complex systems, I assure you. This is just to, like a quiz because you are going to be future journalists. So, maybe you should start guessing, like, if you look at an infographic, you should start questioning it. What does it mean? Okay. So why do you think these bars are so long compared to these? No one? Come on, someone just be courageous and try to guess. Who knows, it might be correct. Okay, people are probably gone to sleep. Interesting. No, it's not really related to gender. No, so the answer is, see, typically standard deviations or dispersions of a particular variable are larger if you have very fewer episodes. Okay, so let's say you are looking at the height of individuals in a classroom. Okay, so if you look at this particular bunch, so you have a fair concentration of people, so you'll get an average value, and the dispersion around would be pretty tight. But if you look at, let's say just 4 people, let's say just the first row, okay, so you'll probably get a much larger dispersion because there will be some people who are much shorter than others and so on. So the spread would be much bigger. Whereas if you look at a larger population, the spread becomes smaller. Okay? So what's happening over here is that they had to stop the trial very quickly because they quickly realized that people were dying. And ethically, you cannot continue the experiment if you know that something pretty wrong is going on. So you had to stop these experiments very quickly. And so therefore, the standard deviations are larger. Whereas, for example, beta blockers, which is the most successful, they could actually continue the experiment over hundreds of individuals. And so therefore, they had a very, very tight spread. Okay? So that's one of the ways you can actually question a scientific infographic. Okay? So actually, I'm pretty sure I'm over time. Okay, great. Thank you. So, instabilities like these, which arise in the complex system affect our lives at all times. I just showed you one example, but you know that sorry, in transportation network, for example, you go to the airport to fly from Chennai to Kolkata, and then you are told, and this especially happens in January. Sorry, sir, your flight would be delayed because there's fog in Amritsar. I'm going to Kolkata, I'm not going to Amritsar. Well, it turns out that the plane which is supposed to take me from Chennai to Kolkata is supposed to fly from Delhi to here, and for some reason the Amritsar bound flight is delayed, and so therefore the gate is not released yet, and so therefore the flight from Delhi will take a long time. So you can see how disturbances in one part of the system can actually start affecting some completely remote part of the system. Similarly, the internet, which is highly sensitive to just the attack of a few key routers, Or, you have this large scale failure of power grids. So branch falls on a, power supply line somewhere, an entire, northern grid goes out, plunging UP, Bihar, and everything into darkness. Epilepsy, climate, collapse of complex civilizations, okay? So all of these are examples where, local cause, which could be pretty minor, could through cascading failures across the network have a global effect, okay? And this brings us to another very important point of complex systems about this role of interactions. So there is safety in ties, and there is also danger in ties. And this is beautifully illustrated by, this group of mountaineers who are tied to each other. The reason they're tied is, of course, if one of them falls, the others can pull that person up. But the problem is, of course, and as you might have seen these movies like, Vertical Limit, right? Anyone seen Vertical Limit? Okay, none of the students seem to have seen it. All my illusions are falling into deaf ears. I'm just too old, I think. So the Vertical Limit movie starts with a father, son, and daughter climbing a big mountain, and then the father slips, pulling I think the son and the daughter along with him, and they try to get a grip, but they soon realize that they're all gradually slipping, and so then the father says, "Just cut me loose." Okay, and the whole movie is about how the sister doesn't forgive the brother for cutting the wire so that the father plunges to his death, so that they could save themselves. Okay? So that's also the danger of ties, right? One person falls could, get the other people also to fall, and eventually the whole team could start, hanging from a loose thread. Okay? So ties or interactions can have both a positive effect as well as a negative effect, and this is what we as complex systems theoreticians like to study. So it turns out, of course, Adam Smith pipped us, way back so he was like probably 250 years ahead of us when he said that every individual neither intends to promote the public interest nor knows how much he's promoting it. He intends only his own security. He is led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. This is nothing but a statement about an emergence of a property which the individual entities are not aware of. Okay? And examples of this are, of course, a gazillion. So we all know about this, various speculative madnesses which occur periodically in history. You had this tulipomania in the 17th century in Holland. Then you had John Law's Mississippi scheme in the 1720s, and actually a simultaneous financial bubble in England called the South Sea Bubble, where people got mad and started buying this shares of the company called the South Sea Company, which promised enormous profits. But of course, anything which sounds too good to be true is always too good to be true. Okay? And eventually the bubble collapsed, thereby making many people lose their shirt. And of course, in modern times, of course, you have had many such things, including dot-com bubble and so on. Now, what is interesting is that every time people said, this time it's different. In fact, I remember, just before the dot-com bubble, talking to a person in the financial industry, and I was like, saying, maybe this is not sustainable. And this person replied, no, the technology, none of the previous bubbles, so all these previous bubbles basically had to do with physical assets. Now we are dealing with, non-physical assets. So there is no limit to how much we can grow. So there's no limit to growth. Okay? And of course, very soon it collapsed. So the question is, why don't we learn from our mistakes? As Cal, the cartoonist, put it beautifully, is it because of this? So, this is he calls this a normal day at the nation's most important financial institution. So this person is, on the phone. I've got a stock here that could really excel. And so this person says, really excel? Excel, sell, and you got a series of Chinese whispers, at which point everybody starts shouting, sell, 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 sell. And then this person says, madness, I can't take it anymore, goodbye. And some person hears it, goodbye? Buy? buy, 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 buy. So, like, is it like just that kind of a crazy, like thing happening in the market? Or is it possible that the individuals are all rational, but nevertheless, their collective decisions lead to irrational outcomes like market collapse? And this is, of course, relevant not just because of financial market, but collapse is something that has happened even to complex societies, right? So this is this final scene from the Planet of the Apes, the original one, not the ghastly reconstruction they made in sometime in the 2000s. So in collapse, society basically suddenly goes through a rapid loss of high level of complexity and falls into a much simpler basis. Now, there have been many attempts at explaining why complex societies collapse, including climate change. Okay? And this is what Professor Shankar will, of course, talk about, not about the collapse, but the climate change aspect of it. But it turns out that indeed climate change could be the instigator of many of these collapses. But even if you don't go to collapse, but just look at how power has waxed and waned among different countries, you see very interesting patterns. So historically, so this is basically the data of Angus Maddison of the University of Groningen, where he looked at the world GDP reconstructed from various historical narratives of different countries. So if you notice, China and India had led the world economy up to the very 19th century. Okay, so this is India, this is China, and this is the share of world GDP. So you can see that Europe is essentially nowhere in the scene. It's only from even up to 1870 or so, China and India were pretty big, and then from 1900 onwards they started shrinking, and then gradually in 2008, we again see a resurgence. So China definitely are starting to catch up, India, well, much more slowly. And interestingly, there's this book by Andre Gunder Frank, Reorient, in which he made the argument that the rise of China is not an anomaly. In fact, it's European rise which is the anomaly. Okay? Europe has always been the attic or the basement of the world economy. Its rise in the 16th century is purely an accident. China and India had always been the global driving forces of the world economy. And what we are seeing now is just the world correcting that accident of history, the Industrial Revolution and the corresponding scientific things that happened around the 16th century, which caused this European perturbation. In fact, we can relate this rise of Europe precisely to this scientific and technological revolutions. And this also raises the question that how do we actually manage this growth? Because we know that this growth is actually going on even as I speak. And why is growth a problem? So as the historian and physicist Derek Solar, I'm just completely, I'm just going to finish right now. So Derek Solar Price said that, the problem with growth is that if progress stops, then the society collapses to a much more simpler form. So this is collapse. On the other hand, there could be a reorganization or change in the technology which could result in a new period of exponential growth. And that's what, essentially Marx also talked about when he talked about the transition from the feudal economy to the capitalist economy. Okay? And presently we are actually trying to see another transition over there. Okay? So the question is, are we facing a crisis today? And there's this concept or hypothesis of a technological singularity, which is essentially saying that things are coming to a head where 2050 or thereabouts, we will see all this exponential growths coming to a head. And something's got to give. We either have to find a way to a completely new way of leading our lives, new way of structuring our societies, or we could face collapse, or of course, there's a third possibility now, right? AI could take over. Okay. It could mean the end of human civilization as we know today, but of course progress will continue. It's just that we would become a dead end of evolution, like the dinosaurs, and evolution would be taken forward by our mind children, as Hans Moravec called it, namely artificial intelligence. Okay, I'm really sorry about going way over time, and it's like to stop here, and thank you.
Right. Thank you so much for this very engaging session, sir. We will now break for coffee for 10 minutes. Tea and coffee is being served in the cafeteria. Please return in time for the Q&A and the rest of the day event. Thank you.
Hello. Welcome back, everyone. Please settle down. We will be starting the second part of our first session on climate and sustainability. I would like to invite to the stage Dr. Jay Asundi, Executive Director, C-STEP, who will chair the session. So, sure.
Thank you. Welcome back. After a very interesting first session, I would like to now introduce the speakers to this particular session on climate and sustainability. As you heard in the previous talk, climate is a complex subject. It is a complex issue, and it is something that we will have to consider when we are thinking about issues around climate change, looking at how to solve these particular problems. If you read the newspapers or magazines or any of the press today, you will find that stories about climate change, and what we should be doing about it it's not a daily phenomenon. It is actually multiple articles every day that are put out there, because it is being treated as the existential question for all of us today. How do we deal with the climate crisis? So, without further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker. Professor R. Shankar is a theoretical physicist and a glaciologist. And during his PhD in the 80s, he worked on aspects of high energy physics, particle physics, and after that he moved to condensed matter physics, which is solid state physics. And the bulk of his research has been in this field, conducted at the Institute of Mathematical Sciences in Chennai. In December 2004, the tsunami happened under his nose in Chennai and made him interested in the earth sciences. And he did some research on tsunamis in collaboration with oceanographers at the National Institute of Oceanography in Goa. After 2008, he combined his passion for physics and the mountains to start working on glaciology in collaboration with glaciologists from in HNB Garhwal University, Srinagar, Uttarakhand, and IISER, Pune. Without further ado, Professor R. Shankar, please.
Good morning to all, and I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to present this talk over here. The title is a bit changed, meaning because climate science itself is a huge field. I'm going to just concentrate on climate change. And see, I'm not a climate scientist, so I'm an outsider. So, but going back and looking at how the process of it was discovered historically gave me a lot of insight and understanding into the issue, and that's what I'm trying to share with you today. So first, some preliminaries: what is weather and what is climate? So the weather is the state of the atmosphere. The atmosphere itself is a very thin film of air which surrounds the Earth. Maximum it extends about 50 kilometers, whereas the radius of the Earth is about 6,400 kilometers. So very thin film stuck on the surface of the Earth. And these are the quantities that characterize it: pressure, temperature, relative humidity, wind speed. So these are what you will see in any Met site that you look up, that characterizes. All these are constantly changing. Temperature in the day might be, night might be 24 in Chennai and day might be 34. Wind speed changes, it rains sometimes, it doesn't rain otherwise. All these things change by every second, every minute, every hour. And there's a pattern. There's a diurnal pattern, there's a seasonal pattern, and so on. Climate is actually defined as the average weather, averaged over decadal scales, 10, 20, 30 years. Not very clearly, there's no clear definition. But it's so the average temperature in Chennai in December over the past 30 years would be the climate of Chennai in December. So actually, since it's an average over long periods, it is easier to predict and model than weather. Because typically average quantities behave more smoothly and then more predictably. And so weather you can predict only at best for a week ahead with any amount of accuracy, maybe 2 weeks ahead. Climate you can actually predict nowadays with the models for about 50 years, 100 years in the future. So as the climate is, as I said, state of the atmosphere, it's determined by, the whole complex system of the Earth. So as we are taught in school, we break it up into components: atmosphere, biosphere, all the life on Earth, mainly plants; cryosphere, all the ice on Earth, mainly in the poles; the land surface, all the water on Earth, mainly in the oceans. But these divisions are just in our heads to help us think. Actually, each of them are influencing each other, and it's a whole, really, as Sitabra described, each of these systems are complex in themselves. They all influence each other quite strongly. So the whole thing is a very, very complex system. And in some sense, you can say, so climate is one thing that emerges in this complex Earth system. Now, in recent years, there's been another component which influences, that is human activities. I'm showing emissions, but it's not just emissions, pollution, various other things. This century, humans have started actually significantly affecting the Earth system, our environment, which is the Earth system. So in fact, many people say that this is the start of a new geological era called Anthropocene, whether it justifies that a new geological era or not. What is very definite is that this is the time that humans have actually significantly started affecting the Earth system and its dynamics. Okay, so it's basically split into two parts. So first let me start with how they discovered it. Now, when did humans first realize that there have been climate changes in the past, or climate is not a constant thing? Probably when they discovered ice ages. The fact that large portions of the Earth were covered with ice. So this is a visualization of the last ice age. There's a view of the Earth from over the North Pole. So now you can see there's only Greenland which is covered with ice, but large portions were covered earlier. So when was this discovered? It was discovered in around 1750 onwards. And how did they discover it? Basically, the geologists discovered it using what is called geomorphology, a fascinating branch of geology, where you look at the shape of the ground, geomorphology meaning shape of the ground, and then infer the processes that led to the shape. So one kind of evidence, this was not the only one that made them guess about ice ages, are these erratics, huge big boulders standing in the middle of nowhere. The question is, how could they get there, or were they formed there? Now, if the rock type of that boulder is different from the rock type of the surrounding boulders, then it's reasonable to infer that it was transported there. The only thing that can transport such a huge boulder is ice. Wind cannot do it, streams, rivers cannot do it. Only ice can transport. So, let me talk a little bit more about Agastmuni in India, erratic, which, since I have collaborators in Uttarakhand, I know a little bit about. So, Agastmuni is over here. This is Rudraprayag, where the Mandakini and the Alaknanda confluence, and about 20 kilometers upstream of it along the Mandakini. Now, again, the rock type of the boulder we saw is very different from the boulders around the area, but it's pretty similar to the rock types of the boulders in this higher reaches. So the inference is at some point of time, the ice, the glaciers, which are here at the moment, had come down up to at least this. When is not known, but at some time the ice must have been much lower. So that was, so clearly then, if the ice had gone so far, there must have been, the climate would have been different, it must have been much colder, so people knew that. It took about 100 years to establish all that. So in the meanwhile, Fourier was a physicist who has done a lot to understand transport of heat. How does heat go from one place to the other? Major contributions in that field. So he asked the question, I think just out of academic curiosity, what sets the temperature of the Earth? So that's what it says, general remark. So average temperature of the Earth is about 14 degrees centigrade. Why is it not 100? Why is it not minus 50? What sets it? He didn't have the full maths to answer everything, but basically this is, now we know how it is set. The Earth is warmed up by the sunshine, and that is the energy going into the Earth. Then any warm body radiates. Like, for example, if you're standing in the kitchen in front of something you're cooking, you can feel the heat, though there's no wind coming there. That is the radiation. Any warm body radiates, so the Earth, as it warms up, radiates out. And when the amount of energy that is coming in is equal to the amount of energy that is going out, people call it energy balance, then the temperature stabilizes at that point. Now, if for some reason there's some extra energy coming in, Earth will heat up. Or if for some reason the radiation going out is blocked, again the Earth will heat up. So this is whenever the balance is changed, it will recur. As I said, Fourier did not know all this, but he asked this very important question: how does the atmosphere influence this energy balance? And so he had this thing about a hot box. I don't know how to pronounce this gentleman's name, but he was a guy who experimented with hot boxes. So you can put some thermocol, this thing, and a few sheets of glass like this, put it out in the sun, and you'll find that lowest part is much higher and it cools as you go up. The temperature becomes less and less as you go up. So now, this is what happens in the atmosphere also. I don't know if you can see this, but this is the temperatures of Madurai and the Kodaikanal. Both of them in a pretty same region, but one of them is about 2,000 meters high. And this is general experience that as you go, the hill stations are cooler. As you go up the atmosphere, it gets cooler and cooler. So that made Fourier make an inspired guess that for some reason the atmosphere is behaving like glass. What behavior of glass? Glass lets in light, but it blocks out heat. So if you have a candle over here, and I'm seeing it, I can see the candle. If I put my hand here, I can feel the heat. You put a glass sheet in the middle, I'll still be able to see the candle because the light is passing, but the hand will feel much less heat. It blocks out the heat and it lets through the light. So that's why the bottom part, the light comes through, heats up the bottom, and then it cools as it goes down. So this was his hypothesis at that time, he just made it, that for some reason, atmosphere behaves like glass. So why does the atmosphere behave like glass? People started looking at that. And first evidence is this Eunice Newton-Foote. She did experiments, simple experiments on how things heat up when there is CO2, when there's water vapor, so on and so forth, and came to this conclusion that, in modern language, water vapor and carbon dioxide, that is moist rather than dry air, and carbonic acid is the old-fashioned name for carbon dioxide, are important greenhouse gases. It is them in the atmosphere that makes it behave like glass. And she also realized the, significance for climate. Very quaint, old-fashioned language, but what she's saying is clearly the concentration of these gases can affect the climate. Almost simultaneously, more experiments were done by a physicist called Tyndall, and again, he was motivated by Fourier's hypothesis. And he says that aqueous vapor, that is water vapor, carbonic acid, that is carbon dioxide, and any hydrocarbon vapors like methane, etc. He identified the greenhouse gases in the thing. And again, he was quite aware of how the concentration will affect the climate. Sorry. So then by the end of the 19th century, the physics and maths of radiation had been understood. It was understood that light and heat waves are all just electromagnetic waves of different wavelengths, and the laws that characterize their behavior, etc., was understood. And almost soon after that, Arrhenius applied it to try to quantify the greenhouse effect. And you can see his motivation here. I should certainly not have undertaken these tedious calculations, except blah, blah, blah. There have been plausible causes of the Ice Age. So Ice Age had been discovered and well established. Ice Ages. So then they were wondering how can there be these huge changes in climate? And that is what. So anyway, this is an example of his tedious calculations, all done by hand, no calculators, nothing. And so, of course, basically his result was that he found that if the concentration of carbon dioxide doubles, the temperature will go up by 5 to 6 degrees centigrade. Now it's less, now we believe it's more like 3. But this fact that when you double the carbon dioxide concentration, the temperature will go linearly, that law is still upheld by all the modern models. And these numbers are not, it was. So at the beginning of the 20th century, it was known that greenhouse effect was an important factor for climate, or at least for global temperature. And it had been quantified by Arrhenius that if it doubles, if the CO2 level doubles, temperature will go up by 5 or 6 degrees centigrade. That was what was known, at least to a small group of people in the world, beginning of 20th century. The first person to worry about anthropogenic effects, at least to my knowledge, is this engineer, British engineer called Callender. So he estimated that we put in a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere. Then Arrhenius, Fourier, etc., told us how much the globe will warm up if we put in so much, and some amount stays there. And he sort of said 0.3 degrees per century warming is what he predicted theoretically. And then he looked at whatever data he had from weather stations and said, actually, okay, this data, by the way, one of them is, this is one from Allahabad. So basically he concluded that it is warming by about 0.5 degrees per century. Data not so great, but so then the question was, how much of that CO2 is still in the atmosphere? Is the atmospheric concentration of CO2 increasing, or whatever we pumped in, is it getting absorbed by the Earth somehow? So this was a classic paper by Keeling, who did these measurements. Yeah. Is carbon dioxide from fossil fuel changing man's environment? This 1969. And the answer was yes. So this represents about 10 years of very hard work, daily monitoring of the concentration in a place called Mauna Loa in Hawaii. And so it's a very clear trend that it's going up, increasing. And by his estimate, CO2 concentration will double in 600 years. Sorry. What? Sorry. And this is the, what do you call it? The measurements have continued in Mauna Loa after Keeling, and this is now called the Keeling curve. So CO2 is steadily increasing, and this is available on the net. Anybody can check it. Global averages are there, etc., etc. So basically, at middle of the century, 20th century, this was a sort of question that after Industrial Revolution, a sudden pulse of CO2 has been injected into the air. Because when you're looking at, so this is going 10,000 years ago till present. All this CO2 injection has been over 100, 200 years. So at geological scale, it's just like sudden pulse of CO2 being injected. And then the temperature is also steadily increasing after that. Huge amount of data goes into these curves, weather stations from all over the world. So is this they're coinciding, but has this caused this? Has the injection of the CO2 caused the temperature rise? Fourier, Arrhenius, etc., all their work indicated that it did. And huge amount of work done in the second half of, 20th century, unequivocally establishes this. There's no doubt now that this has caused this. So I'm not going to, really huge amount of work has gone in this second half. Firstly, a lot of met stations got set up, weather stations, so huge amount of data. Then this World Meteorological Organization, a UN organization, was set up in 1950. So they collated all the data, put it in a form, and then disseminated it to anybody who liked. Because even though there's a lot of data, somebody has to put it together to make sense at a global level. WMO did that. Then computers got invented around that time, and they have been slowly increasing in power, slowly and steadily. So it became possible for climate scientists to simulate weather and climate and so on the computers. So there are all these models nowadays which run on the computers. Then huge increase in the number of people working in the area. As you saw in the 18th century onward, or before, number of people scientists were very few. There were, so progress was also slow, scientists were very few. So in fact, this is paraphrasing a statement by Newton, who actually said that if I saw further, it was by standing on the shoulders of giants. Today's world is very different from Newton's. There are a huge number of workers, all of them contribute. So if we see further, it is by standing on the shoulder of worker ants. So then the IPCC was set up by the WMO in 1988 because by then people were convinced that the problem is real. And there's an issue to be addressed over here. And after 2000, actually huge amount of data for all aspects of earth sciences, including climate, has come from satellite, remote sensing data. First satellite, of course, went up in 1957, the Sputnik. But after that, putting sensors, cameras, various types of measurements, slowly improved. And really, after 2000, significant amount of data has been coming in from these remote sensing applications. So, based on all that, let me try to just summarize the main points of what we understand today. Firstly, that from the science of paleoclimate is a field in itself. They have various techniques to figure out what the climate was in the past. And so the rate of global warming after about 1800 has been much higher than the rates in the past 10,000 years. Okay, so let me... so what are the consequences of global warming? Consequences are that really if you heat up the atmosphere, it becomes a bit more volatile. So extreme events increase, intense cyclones, much more variability in the weather systems, like for example, Indian monsoon, which is crucial for us. Probably the total rainfall will not change much, it might increase a bit, but the variability will change a lot, both in time and in space. And these are the things we are actually experiencing. You know, 0.5 degree warming, etc., we can't figure out. I don't remember the weather, what the weather was, 30 years ago. But these extreme events increasing are that's the manifestation of climate change that we are actually seeing. And then there's a talk about irreversible changes in the earth, which are called tipping points. One of them, I'll just describe very briefly, is this West Antarctica ice sheet. So this Antarctica is in the South Pole, so it's very cold. Even at sea level, the temperature is below zero. So the glaciers come in and actually extend off into the sea. They're floating on the water. So you can see that, I don't know whether it's very visible, but this is the ice, and there is water underneath. This is called the grounding line. So in this region, it's melting from below and above. Now, since because of the warming, the ocean will also warm, so that can lead to an increase in the melting from underneath. And then maybe it can lead to a collapse of the whole ice sheet. And this ice sheet is huge, hundreds of kilometers wide, and sizes in hundreds of kilometers. So then it's estimated that, this is the IPCC mark, that if it collapses, what they call low likelihood but high impact event, sea level could rise up by about 1.5 meters by the end of this century and maybe 15 meters by end of 2300. And this is irreversible. So that's why it's a tipping point. After this happens, even if you manage to cool down the world, it's not that the ice sheet is going to form again. So these are really irreversible events. Okay, I have. Then again, it's very clear that if you want to stabilize the global temperature and the climate, you have to stabilize the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. That means you can emit only as much as the Earth can absorb. And the main effect of the greenhouse gases, about 80% is CO2. That is why everybody worries about CO2. So some quantitative things. So suppose we assume that, take a very optimistic point of view, that someday we will stabilize the CO2 concentration. So if in such a view, then there are two questions. So CO2 in the past has been, say, 1,000 years ago, steady, steady, steady. Then it has started rising after industrial revolution. And then it will keep going up, and let us hope it will stabilize again. Then how much will the temperature rise during this period of heavy rise? So that is called the transient response. As it's heating up, how much will the temperature? Then after it steadies, eventually how much, where will the temperature stabilize? That is called the equilibrium. There are estimates from this, for all this by various models and different techniques. So for the transient response, it's sort of well established, rather surprisingly, that the amount the temperature will go up depends on how net cumulative amount of human emissions. So until 2020, about so much of carbon dioxide was emitted by humans, and it resulted in a warming of 1.1 degrees centigrade. These are all average numbers, uncertainties in all them, I'm not specifying those things. So then in the last decade, about 35 gigatons of CO2 was emitted every year. If we assume that this will carry on, actually, when you look at the curve of emissions, it is increasing decade by decade. But let us suppose this just carries on, then the 1.5 degrees centigrade will exceed by 2050, and the 2 degrees by 2070, and we are probably looking more like a 3-degree rise at the end of the century. Similarly, for equilibrium, this thing that after it stabilizes, say a few centuries after, how much will it go up? So even at current concentrations, eventually you will see a 2 degrees. Right? May happen, because see, the whole Earth system has to adjust itself to the new level of concentration, then it will go to some temperature. So just need of the hour is just to achieve what is called net zero as soon as possible. And this is the only way. Now, how to do it is, again, a very complex problem, and Anjali, I guess, will tell us something about it. It involves society, politics, technology, etc. It's very, very complicated. But is it happening is something we can all see very easily by just going to the internet and looking at the Keeling curve. If it happens, this has to sort of level off and become completely flat. That means, atmospheric concentration has to be constant. All these talks are happening, but at the moment there's no effect on the ground. It is still rising. So keep an eye on that, and at least thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Shankar. I think you've really set the stage for why the antecedents to climate change. I think some of these aspects are not particularly brought out very well in the media, and I think it's very good that you've brought it to our attention. And as you rightly said, I think the next speaker, Dr. Anjali Taneja, is an economist and a seasoned sustainability expert. Over the last 15 years, she has led several sustainability initiatives during her professional tenure with the UNDP, Government of India, Ashoka University, and the National Industry Chambers. At present, she works as a senior policy specialist and a group head of sustainability in C-STEP's climate, environment, and sustainability sector. And she leads specialized work on circular economy, rural development, and studying the dynamics of rural-urban interdependencies, effective waste management in urban and rural spaces, and various practices to reduce the predominance of informal economy in India, as well as strengthening capacity building among researchers in various sustainable development fields. Without further ado, Dr. Anjali Taneja will talk about sustainability solution for urban spaces. So just to give a sense, Professor Shankar just gave us a sense of what is the problem, and I think Anjali will be able to talk about a small aspect that we can address as individuals in the urban spaces. Please.
Okay. Thanks, Jay. First of all, thank you to the esteemed organizers of ACG for inviting us. and to the learned speakers. I have actually gained a lot of insights today and a lot of knowledge on this subject. Hopefully, I won't take much of your time because I know it's about to be lunch, all must be hungry. So, and I try to make it as interesting as possible. Basically, my talk would essentially cover some basics on sustainability, the history of sustainability, sustainable development, and how did this debate actually started historically. What does it mean when it comes to sustainability in urban spaces? Is India today sustainable? When we talk about the urban ecosystem, what are the challenges that India is facing today, and at large the world is facing today when we talk about urbanization, and are we actually sustainable in the real sense? Moving on to that, I'll actually talk about one of the aspects of the challenge and what we have done, we have tried to do to essentially identify some solutions to sustainable development in one of the fields for the urban centers. And finally, what is the way forward when we talk about the policy interventions, what can be undertaken in this field? So when we initiate the whole sustainability debate, it is essentially monitored around the 4 key principles of sustainability. Now, giving a background of how this sustainability debate actually started, sometime around 1713, it was somewhere in Europe, basically Germany, where the policy scientists were actually looking at the sustainability in the forests. At that time, the forestry was a major domain, and that is how first time the concept of having sustainable forests was introduced. But somehow down the line, then there have been a lot of UN interventions on sustainable development, and in 1976, I think the UN Commission on Human Development, Human Settlements actually introduced the concept of sustainable development, which was at large accepted in the world. Then came in a lot of other reports. Essentially, in 2013, it was Professor George William from Europe again, who actually introduced the concept of sustainability in a more clearer sense. There have been a lot of debates, so I will actually report what Professor George has actually said. Sustainability is essentially the balance between environmental, economic, and social well-being. So maintaining that balance. Sustainable development is a means to achieve sustainability. And what UN essentially promotes is that sustainable development in real sense is when there is an inclusive, resilient, sustainable society. So talking about the 4 key principles, we call the 4 key pillars of sustainability. We start with human capital, which is essentially the aim in sustainability is to ensure that human capital is preserved in the most purest form through education, skills development, capacity building, essentially leading to well-being of the humans. At the same time, connected with the social well-being, which is more so improvement in community, basically community development, social cohesion, and understanding the societal aspects, environmental law, how does it portray in the sustainability field. Interconnected to this is actually the concept of economics. So when we talk about social and economic, they both go hand in hand, which is basically essentially covering the standard of living, improvement in the standard of living of the people, of the communities at large, and at the same time, not forgetting that what is the essential part, which is environmental. That is ecological modernization in the truest sense. So these are the 4 key pillars, but I would say they are not independent of each other. They are all interconnected. They are all in what we call today a systems theory. It is basically, they are nested together. So if you have to achieve sustainability or sustainable development, all the 4 are interconnected, have to be achieved together, balancing them out. In the context of urban sustainability, the systems theory play a very important role, because urban systems, if you look at urban ecosystem, they are actually not linear or hierarchical. They are more like nested. So you have a major particular larger system, and urban systems are subsystems to those, characterized by governance, that is urban planning, then material and energy flows, at the same time infrastructure in the urban areas, and socio-economic dynamics. So if we are studying about sustainability, especially in the urban field, it is important that these 4 characteristics of the urban economy need to be met in the truest form. This is a very interesting debate that I came across recently, and people and students who are interested in actually reading about sustainability can refer to this MDPI paper on sustainability review written by Maria and Rosalind. And I have adapted this kind of graph actually from that paper. Very interesting. If I will first explain the 3 key colors that I am representing here. Green, of course, represents environmental. Orange is more of societal, social cohesion when we talk about. And blue is, of course, economic. So economics in the sense of standard of living, improvement in the standard of living, and improvement in development, economic development. What I show on this chart here, this is not moving. Okay, so anyway, so this basically graph actually reflects the positioning of the agendas and initiatives from the 1970s till date globally, and how they position on the weak versus strong sustainability radar. Now, one would ask, what is weak sustainability? I will pitch back to what is weak sustainability when we talk about economics. So there are 2 schools of thought in economics. One is neoclassical economics, and one is the new economics, which is more like the sustainability economics. Weak sustainability more correlates with the neoclassical economics approach, which says that the natural resources are finite, and human beings can overpower over the natural resources, because once they get extinct and the natural resources are over, then human beings still can fulfill their needs with the help of technological advancements. But weak sustainability in that sense is actually not very robust, because when we talk about sustainability, as I said before in the previous slide, it is actually environmental, the natural resources that are the key important ingredients, and they are finite, they are irreplaceable, and of course humans cannot be the dominant factor in them. There comes in the debate of strong sustainability, where there's a new school of thought which has now encompassed not only neoclassical, but at the same time recognize the fact that sustainability is not just about technological advancements, it is also about how we can preserve our natural resources. So if you actually look at some of these, okay, great, it's working again. If you look at some of these agendas that I've listed below, like the Brundtland Commission report, I can speak of few of them. Brundtland Commission report was in 1986, where Brundtland Commission introduced the concept of sustainable development, and they said that according to Brundtland Commission report, it said that sustainable development in the truest sense cannot be achieved, or rather under sustainable development, what it actually means is that the needs of the current society should not be compromised to fulfill the needs of the future generations. But again, I would suggest that Brundtland Commission report was somewhere between weak sustainability and strong sustainability, because it talked a lot about the societal cohesion. When it comes to strong sustainability, as I said, it actually means a balancing of all the 3 forces: societal cohesion, environmental integration, as well as economic development, which as you move up, if you see moving up the radar, we see that sustainable development goals as on date have been trying to it's very close to strong sustainability debate, as well as the concept of circular economy, which is very close to what I would be talking in my talk today over next couple of slides. Just looking at this global picture of urbanization, nearly 2/3 of the population, or I would say 6 billion population, are expected to become, would be basically, urbanization is rising at a rapid pace, so would be actually moving out from rural to the urban areas. And this is a global picture. And this is actually alarming today. If you look at 2040, by 2040, urbanization will take a steep rise. But at the same time, when we talk about rural regeneration, or when we talk about local production, enhancing local production, that will decline rapidly because the rural sector will actually reflect a more declining trend. And it also means that a lot of migration would be happening from the rural to the urban areas eventually. Again, it's more or less a similar picture when we talk about India. In India, of course, urbanization took off from 1995, I would say, and it's been now taking a steep rise. The gray one is the urbanization line. But at the same time, the ruralization or the rural economy is tapering off, which actually means that India at this point is there is urban encroachments. There are more urban dwellings that are coming up. To a large extent, it is also leading to suburban crawl, I would say. And the concept of compact cities is actually declining. Rather, it should be now reintroduced and brought back into the mainstream agenda. So when we talk about urbanization, first of all, and when we say that there are urban cities that are rising, what does it mean when it comes to urbanization? What are the challenges? So I have actually spread out some of them, but this is not exhaustive. I would try to explain the two key major perils, or rather I would say issues that the urban economies are facing today. And if you look at the Indian context, you will realize that this is largely true. Congestion. So if you see transportation today, India actually, the urban infrastructure depends a lot on, urban planning rather depends on the kind of, transport that is being deployed. Having a car today is a social symbol. So it is actually leading to overcrowding, congestion, air pollution. There is slums development as well, growth of slums. I don't know whether you're aware, Dharavi, which is in Mumbai, is one of the largest, actually is the largest slum in Asia. So it's actually leading to a lot of congestion and air pollution. At the same time, it is also contributing to suburban sprawl. That is when suburban sprawl is actually when we talk about urban sectors or basically the urban economy expanding beyond its boundaries and getting into the rural sector or the forestry space which is reducing the green economy parts of it. So actually it is leading to more deforestation. The concept of built-in environment, that is more buildings that are coming up these days, it is causing the heat to get trapped in those buildings, so which is also leading to a lot of climate change. And as I said, sustainability is an interrelated concept. So these two add to the burdens of the urban centers when we talk about reduced quality of life, excessive energy usage, greater waste generation. Not sure if you are aware that today, according to official estimates, around 84% of the waste today, sewerage waste especially, has not been treated in India. So which brings in the problem of that what is happening to the waste today. And this is one of the challenges that I'll be talking about in detail. Coming to India's waste problem. So essentially when we talk about waste is from various sectors, whether it's energy, whether it's solid waste, solid, municipal solid, or agriculture, or construction and demolition. What is the kind of waste being generated, and how is that waste being recycled or repurposed, or anyway, how is it being disposed of? And today the picture is really grim because India is expected to generate over 96 metric tons of waste over the next couple of years. And the sad part is that only 22 to 25% of that waste is recycled in the country. Nearly 65 to 70% of that waste goes into landfills, which brings in the issue also of resource extraction that compared to other countries, India's resource extraction is actually one of the highest. if you look at some of the sectors, and especially talking about the waste in the urban sectors, construction and demolition waste is very high. And it actually adds to around 33 to 45% of the greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, when we talk about plastics, plastic waste is also quite high. But the good part is that recycling in the plastic waste industry has started happening. But also there are some studies, and the ground reality is also that though the government has set up some targets in the plastic waste industry, the targets are essentially just for recycling, which is just 60%. The rest of the plastic waste, how does it get repurposed or reused? There is no clarity at the moment. Of all this, when we talk about energy, and this graph the down one, says that energy is one of the largest contributor to GHG emissions. And in that context, when we say solar photovoltaics are essentially one of those, they are very, very powerful industries. Solar photovoltaic industry is very powerful today. But what is expected to be generated by the end of life in solar photovoltaic industry, that and how will it be treated? That is still a very big question mark in the country. If you see the renewable energy potential today of India, again reiterating the fact that India is the fourth largest solar capacity, has the fourth largest solar, is actually the fourth largest solar market. And in photovoltaics, it is expected to become the second largest in the world very soon. Solar encapsulates a bigger part of the renewable energy, but at the same time, how it is being disposed essentially is the big question today in the urban centers. And when I talk about PV, this graph actually reflects the ground-mounted photovoltaic installations. So this is some of the work that we did now in C-STEP, and to estimate the amount of waste that is expected to be generated from ground-mounted PV installations. And at the same time, we also tried to see what could be the essential sustainable solution. That is, by the end of life, if there is a generation of certain amount of PV waste, how it can be recycled and repurposed. So if you see on the left side, this graph, the blue one, basically today India's total installed PV capacity is a little over 64 gigawatt. It's 64.3 to be precise, gigawatt. And that converges into, by 2050, it is expected to generate nearly 4.5 million tons of waste. By 2050, rather, India is expected to be the fourth largest waste generating country in PV. If you see some of the 5 major states which are expected to generate the highest amount of PV waste, Rajasthan tops the bracket. In fact, in Rajasthan, solar park is one of the largest in the world. In fact, the largest in Asia, the solar park in Rajasthan. And next comes Karnataka. Tumkur, that is Pavagada Park, is actually one of the largest. So if you see these top 5 states in India, essentially 4 from the southern, and including Tamil Nadu, and Rajasthan and Gujarat, they represent nearly 77% of the total PV waste to be generated, expected to be generated. This is more like, if you have to understand what is the difference between a linear and a circular economy, this actually chart reflects that. Quickly just running it through, when we talk about a linear economy, linear is take, make, and dispose. That is, you manufacture a product or you assemble a product, you build it around, and then at the end of life, you just dispose it. So we don't know how it is being disposed. Studies reflect that nearly 85% of the total waste, PV waste that is generated in India is disposed of into landfills. And also there is a high concentration of the informal economy. So naturally, if there are informal sector that is involved, in that case, the waste that is being generated, it is not being properly disposed of. So in a case of a linear economy, linear setup, the waste starts from the raw material stage, we come to the module manufacturing or assembling stage. At this point, India is not manufacturing, it is largely assembling PV, that is photovoltaic modules, and finally leads to ground-mounted rooftops, and finally this at the end of life, they get disposed of. On the other hand, when we talk about a circular economy, which is essentially the waste management component, we tend to bring it back to the end-of-life treatment, where there is physical disintegration, thermal, as well as chemical treatments to recycle, repurpose that waste. That waste could be taken up by the off-takers to bring it back into the assembling stage, or may be basically used for other raw material stuff. That essentially is the circular economy stage that we are talking about. So this is the estimated waste, 4.5 million tons. So what we did at CSTEP, we tried to come up with a kind of a waste recycling framework in PV, which is adaptable to all the Indian states. It's actually a nationwide PV waste recycling framework. And I can quickly explain in very simple terms so that it doesn't get complicated. The inputs here, when we tried to develop this framework, was actually the inputs basically were the data from the ground-mounted photovoltaic PV plants, data from the industrial zones, that is the SEZs essentially. Then there was we did geospatial analysis to identify the distance between each of the PV plant. And at the same time, there was a combination of optimization analysis was done to identify the minimum cost of transporting the waste, as well as the shortest distance. So the three approaches that are being listed out here is actually a clustering-driven approach. I can take this off-site also in detail if anybody wants to understand. So these approaches were essentially when we cluster the PV plants either on the basis of their installed capacities or on the basis of their district-wise cumulative capacities, or even agglomerative hierarchical clustering, which is essentially done in Python. So the inputs were the data that we listed out. The output that we got was actually the real identification of or potential identification of the PV collection centers for waste, the potential locations in the industrial zones where the recycling units can be set up, and the areas where the off-takers industry can actually come and repurpose and reuse that waste. So without delaying it that much, I will actually come to the results of the last approach, and the rest of the approaches can also be studied in detail. It is given on our website. So if you see quickly, on the basis of the geospatial analysis and the optimization analysis, what we found out were that there are 6 clusters of PV plants which can actually become in each of them, there could be the 6 collection centers. If you see the table here, you can actually understand that these districts are all urban areas, essentially semi-urban, peri-urban areas, and these could actually become potentially the collection centers for the PV waste. We also identified that there could be 2 recycling units. Those could be set up to recycle this amount of end-of-life PV waste, and those units could be set up essentially in Vijaypura and Tumkur. This exercise was done for the state of Karnataka, but at the same time, this framework can be implemented in other states of India as well. So what we try to encapsulate here, that when we are talking about end of life of a PV waste, we cannot let it actually go into the landfills. There have to be collection centers which can collect the PV waste. There have to be a proper transport mechanism which can transport the PV waste to the recycling center into in specific industrial zones. And of course, this was an intervention that came out in one of our studies, that if you see down below, this is our framework. Now, to implement this framework, we actually need a monitoring and reporting mechanism which not only tracks PV installations, but also reports the estimated amount of waste and also the informal practices, because the whole need is to converge the informal practices or merge them into the formal sector. So I'm coming close to my end of the slides. When I spoke about the perils, so essentially there were 2 major perils I was talking about. One is transport, that is congestion, and the second was the suburban or the urban sprawl. Now, in order to overcome, and of course, a large part of that was offsetting into other perils. This section basically talks about when we talk about, so waste management is one part, but overall, what can we do? So if we have to minimize today emissions from urban transport, or we have to minimize the emissions from urban sprawl, one essential is we have to look at alternatives. And alternatives doesn't just mean alternatives in green spaces, but we have to look at what are the alternatives that can be used in fuels. So biofuels, dependency on the biofuels. That could actually have positive spillovers on the agriculture sector, because if we talk about ethanol blending today, it is very much in demand. I'm not sure how many of you are aware, today there is a lot, 95% of petroleum is imported by India and is mixed with petrol. So essentially, what we are trying to say is to reduce those imports and blend it with replace it with ethanol. That ethanol can be produced locally in India, which through feedstock, which means we are not only generating an alternative biofuel, which is far more environmentally sound, but at the same time generating employment as well as food security for people who are actually producing ethanol. So one important strategy to minimize, I would say, urban emissions is actually to depend on biofuels. Second is, when we talk about transport, we not necessarily have to be depending just on motorized, that is the normal petrol-driven motorized transport. Essentially, it has to be electric vehicles. They are definitely little costly, but they are very environmentally sound. And at the same time, we have to also start understanding the practice of depending on public transport, depending upon creating more lanes for cycles and bicycles to actually move around, so that the dependency on cars can actually reduce. So this is a very important factor when we talk about urban sustainability, reduction in modes of transportation, more from shifting the gear from motorized to non-motorized and more electrical based. And finally, as I spoke about, to reduce the suburban sprawl, it has to be compact urban cities. There is no other way to think about urban sustainability unless we not talk about greener spaces, unless we not talk about greener buildings in India. So when we talk about compact urban forms, it would actually lead to more positive environmental spillovers in terms of cooling energy demand, increased cooling energy demand, and growing material footprint of the buildings. That would actually reduce. It also means that creating urban boundaries, that is a differentiation between rural and urban sector, should be clearly spelled out through policies and interventions. And dependency on energy, which is more renewable in nature, creating water efficiency. One of the ways in creating water efficiency in the urban areas is to understand the concept of pond cities, where we have these natural lakes or beds, that is natural lakes and beds, that create the infrastructure required for the rainfall to be absorbed and collected. And that could lead to more efficient distribution of water. It can actually even prevent urban flooding in a large number of instances. And finally, the concept of waste management, which I have already spelled about. So when we say urban sustainability, it is divided into three major forms that I've spoken in. So this is like a summary slide. Urban form, it has to be compact. Transportation, effective. More non-motorized. Dependency on public means of transport. And dependency on renewable energy resources, which are far more, and fuels that are more biotic in nature, and dependency on green buildings. Next.
Sit down. Dr. Anjali, I think we have a few minutes for questions. So Dr. Anjali and Professor Shankar, if you can come on the stage, we can probably take some questions from students. Please raise your hands. There are no stupid questions, right? Yes, I think the lady there can give her the mic. Yes.
So just on the context of there are no stupid questions, this is probably one of that. My question is to Anjali ma'am. So I wanted to understand better of when we shift to electricity. I just wanted to understand, so electricity is also generated from coal. Then in that context, how much is the trade-off of shifting from fossil fuels to electric vehicles?
Okay, so dependency on coal is actually also a debate these days, that because it is leading to a lot of pollution, right? So when we say fossil fuels, when we say basically biofuels, I would say the trade-off is quite high. You can actually lead to more generation of effective, I mean, compared to coal, I would rather say biofuels should be the greater dependency factor, because in terms of pollution, studies have reflected that using coal actually leads to greater pollution, more than, I think, 65% compared to biofuels. So over a period of time, I would say ethanol blending, or rather biofuels, should be the need of the hour, certainly a positive trade-off in that context.
Next question.
Hello. Yeah, my question is again for Anjali ma'am. We were talking about recycling of solar panels. In terms of electric vehicles as well, there's an over-reliance on battery technology.
Yeah.
And we're talking about battery technology getting better day by day. But at this particular moment, the kind of emphasis on, say, public government policies to shift over to electric vehicles, we're making this trade-off where there are two aspects of it. One is a supply chain question, where are we getting the basic elements of these batteries from? And the second question is, what about the recycling of these batteries?
Yeah.
So these batteries, if I'm not wrong, need to be replaced every 5 to 8 years.
Yeah.
And what happens to that waste, given that recycling in battery industry lags behind what
Yeah.
the development is like?
True. Yes, this is a very interesting question. In fact, this is one of the things that we are now studying in C-STEP, battery recycling, because you are absolutely right. When we talk about batteries, they are again coming up in a big way as a major waste challenge. And today there is essentially, unfortunately, there is no clear policy directive when we on battery recycling. But the whole thing about talking about sustainability as such, from that angle, if we say electric vehicles is certainly a good to go. But as I said, EV might not be a cost-effective solution for the middle class today, and at the same time, the battery component is another thing that we have to see the recycling of them. But yes, from the sustainability perspective, when we want environmental solutions, I think EV is one of the solutions for that. But you're absolutely right. Battery recycling is another space which has not been studied much. No policy rather limited policy directives. They are still coming up in a big way on the how to replace or recycle. Jay, do you want to add anything here?
No, I think you pretty much answered it. I think these are still open questions. I think what she did talk about in her talk was about public transport and non-motorized transport. I think encouraging that. I think when we look at EVs, we are looking at it from the perspective of replacing what we cannot replace otherwise. Also, you're going from what are called point source to non-point source to point source emissions. So controlling that would be a lot easier than controlling a non-point source emission. So I think the earlier question was also about electric vehicles. Yes, it's not a 1:1 comparison. The point, of course, is that if you green the grid, you're more likely to have more renewable sources of energy, and so hence you're going to have your electric vehicles run on renewable energy. Obviously, no one's asking one to replace it with more coal-fired power plants. You need more renewable energy for that. Any other questions? I think there's a hand up there.
I have a question for Anjali ma'am. So in 2013, when the Jawaharlal Nehru National Solar Mission was introduced, the manufacturers wanted to use local materials, and the US made a complaint the WTO declared that India's measures for the NSM was protectionist. My question is, with these restrictions imposed on domestic solar energy production by the WTO, what do you think is the future for solar energy production?
It's actually a wait and watch approach at the moment, but precisely when we talk about India, I honestly feel that India is definitely moving in the right direction. I'm not sure if you must have studied the 2021-22 budget, and there is an redirected emphasis on, production of solar energy, and especially photovoltaics through extended producer responsibility, or taking more made in India concept, taking it forward through identifying who would be the final owner of the waste. So all these, the challenges from the global world would always be there, but at the same time, in India, what steps could be taken at the government level to reinforce the need of moving towards solar energy and ensuring that it continues? That is happening definitely. So I would say that we might have to wait and see what essentially comes out of those discussions and deliberations over a period of time. But in India, definitely there's a concerted focus and they're moving in the right direction.
Okay, I'm going to exercise one last question, but it has to be to Professor Shankar here. Otherwise, no questions, please. Yes. Any student questions? Student questions to Professor Shankar? Yes.
Good afternoon. My question actually is to both of you, as you extensively spoke about climate change and sustainable development. Today we are surrounded in a debate whether are these issues real. It is said that every time a country cannot ensure development, they start talking about climate change. Your comments, please.
Well, climate change is very real, and I think that's very firmly established that it's and independent of country. Climate change, again, it's a global problem. So now, development and sustainability, I think that part I'll hand over to Anjali. But I don't see them as being confronting each other. It's not either development or sustainability. There is a path towards which is sustainable development, but let me stop here and hand over to the expert.
You have answered more or less. As you rightly said, development and sustainability have to move hand in hand. Sustainability cannot be worked in isolation at all. It has to be an interconnectedness. So climate change is definitely real, and we have to wake up now, and to ensure sustainability, we have to see where to draw the line between what is sustainable and what cannot be sustained in future. Want to add something, sir?
For the first part. See, that's a point I tried to stress in my talk, that the climate change, its discovery and its establishment is a result of about 200 years of work. So it is as real as old as any other science. And it has gone along the same path as all the other. So it is as real as, say, the fact that sun will rise in the east, and it will set in the west, or the fact that if I take this and just let go, it is going to fall. I may be exaggerating a bit, but it's as much of a scientific fact as any of these.
So if there is, do you have one? Yeah, the last question from this student. Yeah.
Sir, my question is to Shankar sir. Regarding the net zero, we know that how the Western countries, especially the US, was pushing India to announce a net zero cutoff date. Do you think the excessive focus on net zero is diverting attention from our immediate need to cut the carbon emissions immediately?
Okay, so firstly, when I said net zero, I meant globally, for the entire world. Now, if you take one region like India going to net zero, that's not a confirmable thing. You have to estimate how much is being this extra. Now, I didn't get the last point, that the net zero and cutting carbon. Cutting carbon emissions is net zero. So net zero means that you emit only as much as the earth can absorb. So ultimately you don't increase the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And there's no way out. One has to do that. How much time and how will we do that are all difficult questions. But if you don't get to net zero globally, it's not US or India or this thing, then the earth will continue to warm up.
So with that, thank you, Professor Shankar. Thank you, Dr. Anjali Taneja. And thank you for all of you for spending time with us on this panel. I think we will break. Okay, so I will now hand over to the MC to take care of logistics.